Hey everyone. Okay, final video of the class. In this video, I want to kind of pick up from where we left off in the last video and the overview video for this week to talk a little bit about, frankly, where we are right now. I'm going to try to get you kind of to the present moment. And actually, I just added some stuff onto this lecture just in the past few days because stuff that's happening right now, literally right now, is a part of this story. So what I'm going to talk about is the sort of rise of a new nativism, right? What I'm going to kind of argue to you is that we are in a moment of a sort of revived nativism in this country. And a lot of it has to do with the presidency of Donald Trump. So we're going to talk a lot about President Trump and about some of the policies that he's enacted and the ways that he has taken the sort of concerns over or the association of immigration and security, and kind of use them to enact a sort of new nativist agenda, right? That not only revives some of the same nativist arguments that we've seen in the past, right, throughout American history, arguments about the economic impact of immigration, arguments about sort of culture and race, but also adding sort of elements of arguments about the security to those arguments, right? So the newest nativism, the nativism that we sort of see being enacted right now, is a nativism not only about economics, not only about culture and race, but also about security, right? So I want to talk a little bit about where that comes from and how it comes about, okay? All right, so all of this, I mean, the conversation sort of starts in some ways, or we can start this conversation by talking a little bit about the campaign of Donald Trump, right? From the very outset, when Trump announced his candidacy for President of the United States, right, immigration was one of the centerpieces of his entire campaign. So I want to show you a brief clip of his campaign announcement to sort of illustrate this. Okay, so what you can see from this clip is that not only was immigration one of the kind of first things that he talks about as his justification for running for president, but also he makes certain assumptions about why immigration needs to be something that he sort of changes, right? He associates, first of all, immigration with people from particular places. So he talks about Mexico, he talks about Central America, and he talks about the Middle East. But he associates sort of all immigration with essentially danger, right? With threats, with security. And in many ways, right, that is picking up from a narrative that began with 9/11, right? When immigration services started to get overtaken by administration of national security, right? When the INS gets placed in with the Department of Homeland Security, when lots of laws came up that associated regulation of immigration with the sort of protection of the country, right? Trump essentially just uses this association and then kind of magnifies it in a lot of ways, right? By adding sort of racial elements to it, but by sort of continuing on a lot of these kind of tropes, right? When Donald Trump was elected president, he then gained the ability to activate a lot of these ideas in ways, in legislative ways, right, or in ways through law and through the government. So I want to kind of go over some of the ways that President Trump has taken this kind of nativist agenda and put it into place, right, over the past few years. So Donald Trump took the oath of office on January 20th, 2017. 1 week later, right, on January 27th, to kind of show the immediacy and the importance, the significance of this issue for him, right, and for his presidency. he authorized Executive Order 13769, aka we probably know this better as the travel ban. This was essentially an order to restrict immigration to this country in some really important ways. And the first kind of piece of evidence that shows that that this is a part of a nativism that also sees immigration as a threat, right, as a threat to security, is the very title of the act, right, or of the executive order. The executive order was an executive order for protecting the nation from foreign terrorist entry, right? So the travel ban was effectively a restriction of immigration in order to prevent entry of terrorists, right? That was the kind of justification. So again, it's sort of picking up on this association of immigration with threat, right? And threat in the wake of 9/11 and in the wake of sort of the terrorist attacks of 9/11. What it did was it blocked all entry from certain countries, those countries being Iran, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, Yemen, for 90 days, right? Essentially said that there was no entry of anyone from those countries in 90 days. And the reason those countries were picked, right, is because this is who the administration designated as countries where there was terrorist activity that they wanted to sort of prevent from entering the country, right? So they sort of chose these regions because they associated those regions with terrorism, right? It also suspended the U.S. refugee program for 120 days. And this is another sort of important part of the changes that were brought about by the Trump administration, is that the refugee immigration and asylum immigration, as we'll see, are two forms of immigration that are specifically sort of associated with national security risks, right? The Trump administration has seen these wings of the immigration mechanisms as being the highest risk for the kinds of security issues that they associate with immigration more generally, right? So the U.S. Refugee program was suspended for 120 days because the administration saw that as a risk to the country, right? In the wake of that, it also limited the amount of refugees that could come into this country. So it limited the amount of people that were admitted through the refugee program from 110,000 all the way to 50,000 for that year, for 2017. And then in the years that followed, it limited the cap, so the number of people who were allowed to come into the country through the refugee program. In 2018, that cap was 45,000. And in 2019, that cap was 30,000. And to put this into perspective, the average cap on the refugee program before this was around 96,000. So this is a dramatic, dramatic decrease in the amount of refugees that are allowed into this country. In the next year, in April 2018, the Trump administration announced what they called a zero-tolerance asylum policy. So remember that asylum seekers are people that come into the country sort of without not through mechanisms of immigration, right? They sort of show up in this country, or they maybe show up in another country, right, a third-party country, and apply for admission to this country through because of reasons of persecution, right? Various sort of styles of persecution that you've read about, right? In April 2018, the Trump administration reformed the asylum policy to be what they called a zero-tolerance policy, which essentially meant that if you cross into the country without a sort of proper, not through the proper mechanisms, right, and the proper channels, that you will be prosecuted and essentially that you can forfeit your claim to asylum, right? At that time, the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, said, quote, "If you cross the border unlawfully, we will prosecute you. If you're smuggling a child, then we're going to prosecute you, and the child will be separated from you." And so what this zero-tolerance policy did is it not only changed sort of the way that asylum claims were made, but it also enacted a policy of child separation, of family separation, in part to deter people from showing up in this country sort of in ways that, not through other, or not through the channels of sort of immigration, of normal immigration, right? So from April to June 2018, the Trump administration separated migrants who showed up into the country. We don't know exactly how many people were separated, but our best sort of guesses are something in the thousands of children separated from parents and from guardians that traveled with them. largely along the southern border, right? So along the border with Mexico. A few months later, in November, there was the Trump administration put through an asylum ban, which essentially said that anyone who doesn't show up through a port of entry, right, through an official port of entry, is ineligible for applying for asylum, right? So if you come to this country by boat, or or you show up, you cross the border in some place that's not an official port of entry, right? You have forfeited your chance to apply for asylum. So all of this are ways to sort of restrict immigration, right? That's kind of how it's nativism, right? Nativist agenda is essentially to restrict immigration as much as possible. These are all attempts to restrict immigration, but done sort of strategically through specific mechanisms. And by identifying these specific parts of immigration, specifically like refugee programs and asylum programs, as being fundamentally threatening, right? Yeah, we could go into lots of other ways the Trump administration has done this. We could talk about the border wall, right, which is essentially a way to kind of bar unauthorized entry into the country, right, and bar specifically sort of unauthorized asylum seekers. But the way that I kind of want to end this is actually by talking about some things that have happened very recently with the coronavirus pandemic, because the Trump administration has also decided to sort of further sort of nativist policies in response to the pandemic, right? So, for example, one of the things that the administration just recently did a few days ago was suspended all green cards for 60 days. So application for green cards were suspended. There were no green card entries for 60 days. A few exceptions, but on the whole, sort of those entries were limited for 60 days. And in sort of explaining this, right, the way that President Trump explained this was he made it about an economic issue, right? It was his justification was to say that there is a massive economic crisis going on, and so issuing green cards to immigrants, right, is essentially issuing jobs to people that are not U.S. citizens, right? So this is kind of right out of the exact same kind of mentality and arguments that nativism has been making for a really long time in this country. And then, just as of like a day ago, there was an announcement that the Department of Education was going to make regulations that universities not provide funding from that they get from the federal government. So there's been this series of bailout packages. Some of that money has gone to institutions of higher education, universities like Baylor University. But the Department of Education has said specifically that they are instructing universities not to give any of that funding, so sort of financial relief and scholarships, to students who are a part of the DACA program. The DACA program is the Deferred Action program that was set up during the Obama administration to try to give a sort of temporary status for people that are in the country, children of people who came into this country illegally, right? The DACA program has allowed lots of people to attend universities and get jobs and things like that. But this has been a program that the Trump administration has wanted to kind of shut down and limit and restrict in various ways. And we see that just another example of that right now, right? Literally a day ago, when the administration has tried to sort of limit the constraints or limit the reach of that program, right? In the way that that program allows undocumented immigrants, right, from getting services from the federal government and from state governments as well. So what this all translates to is that we kind of find ourselves, and this is the sort of thesis of the lecture in a way, is that we kind of find ourselves in a moment, right, where we see nativism really as a prominent part of a lot of American public life, right, from the administration that's from the presidential administration that's in office right now, to affecting a lot of the issues that you're experiencing literally at this moment. So in a way, I wanted to kind of give you this lecture to say that all of what you've been learning throughout this class is relevant to today, right? There's a history to what's happening in our exact moment right now, a long history, right, that we have studied and tried to process and understand. And so that's kind of where I want to leave you, to say that everything that you've learned in this class, hopefully, is kind of relevant. and it will help you think about the world today and what's going on with the people around you, with the institutions around you, and with our country in the way that that it exists. So that's it from me. Good luck, and I'll see you around.